Hey friends, welcome to 2025 and reading through the Gospels in 90 days. That's what we're doing here over the next 3 months. We're going to be reading through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And I just put a link off to the side there for the plan. If you use the YouVersion Bible app on your phone or your tablet, you can click that link and get to it. You can also use it on your laptop, I believe, just on the internet. And that will give you the reading for each day that you can check off on. Also includes some extra teaching videos from the Bible Project, which I personally love. Will help you understand some more things as well. Also, I'm just starting now that there's a place to leave comments and notes on the passage for each day. So if you join us in this through the app, you can leave your thoughts on what you're learning for the day, and we can interact together. And I love that. Of course, if you don't want to do it that way, if you just want to use your regular old Bible, which I also love, I have a breakdown for that. But it's basically just going to be a chapter a day for the next 3 months, 90 days. So Matthew chapter 1 is today. Matthew chapter 2 will be tomorrow. A chapter a day. So it's not real complicated to follow. And I love it because I love just soaking in the life and teachings of Jesus. It's just a wonderful thing. It's a good way to root us. We're for people of faith. Also, I want to invite you, if you're a person that's not ever read the Bible, don't necessarily have faith in Jesus, but you just want to learn what it's all about, I would love to have you on this journey as well. Will be a really good opportunity to get a firsthand look at who the Bible and Christians believe Jesus to be. I'm going to try to keep these videos short, which I'm not going to be very good at, but that's my attempt. And so for that reason, I'm not going to try to necessarily walk through and explain everything that's going on in each chapter of the Bible, but I do want to invite you to leave either in the comments, or if you're doing the app plan, to leave your thoughts there as well too, so we can see what we're picking up on together. The things that I maybe choose to mention might not be the things that you choose to focus on, because I'm going to look at primarily in these couple minutes we have together the opening of Matthew's account of the gospel and the genealogy, which tends to be a part that is we find either boring or confusing or whatever. But there's actually a lot in there. And I guess my overarching thought for you today is, and you may already know this, but maybe it'll just be sort of reinforced, is that the more you know the Old Testament, the more you'll understand the New Testament. Now, just to understand the Old Testament doesn't mean that you know exactly how things are going to happen, because there's both continuity, I like to say, right, or the story continues from the Old Testament into the New. But there's also discontinuity, or surprises that happen, that things don't happen exactly the way that people will expect. A couple examples of that are from right off the bat. Matthew 1:1, this is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Now, if you don't know who David is, if you don't know who Abraham is, if you don't know what the word Messiah or Christ, depending on the translation, is, then you may not understand a big part of the story that's being told. It's sort of like, you've probably experienced this, either you or somebody else kind of comes in and sits down on the sofa, and you're watching a TV show and you're 2 or 3 seasons in, and the other person hasn't seen it. And so they're sitting there watching this for a couple minutes, and they're saying, well, who is that? Are they married? Are they dating? Are they, who are they? Who's that guy? Right? You're asking all these questions because the TV show has already been going on for 2 seasons. The person that you're with, they've been watching it. They know everything, and you're just jumping in late. And so if we're reading the New Testament without reading the Old Testament at all, we're kind of jumping in late. Now, when you jump in late, you can kind of figure it out, but it takes you a little bit longer. The more you understand the backstory, the more you understand what's going on before, the more you can understand what's happening now in the story. And so that's the opportunity, the invitation that we have. And so I have, if you want to jot this down, if you don't know this background, you're not that familiar with David, or it seems more like, well, David was, was a king. He was a guy who loved God, but what does that have to do with Jesus or Abraham? I don't remember exactly what's going on with him. The places that you'll want to look are Genesis chapter 12, the beginning of that for Abraham. That will give you an idea of how his story starts. And with David in particular, as it relates to Jesus, you'll want to look at 2 Samuel chapter 7 and the promise that God makes to him. So, right, God promises Abraham that the whole world's going to be blessed through his descendants. And that's ultimately going to come to fruition in Jesus, as we'll see as we walk through the story. And with David, God promised that he would never cease to have a descendant who was on the throne, right, who was a king. That's what this word Messiah or Christ relates to, anointed one, that was often associated with a king. And so Jesus is going to be the fulfillment of all of these promises, all of these covenant, which is kind of a fancy word that we use for the promises and the relationship that God establishes throughout the biblical story, that Jesus is going to be the fulfillment of that. So Matthew, right off the bat, the first verse, the first thing he says is that this is the genealogy, the background. This is the story through which Jesus, who is the Messiah, the anointed one, the promised one, the King. This is how it comes about, right? So the genealogies tend to be boring for us, but they're not really. Particularly this one. Maybe some of them are harder to kind of get things out from others. But again, as you read these names, and now a lot of the names aren't going to be very familiar, even if you spend a good amount of time in the Old Testament. Although you can find them there, they're just the various kings in the line of David and some other folks along the way. But if you understand these stories that have gone on, then you get a deeper and deeper view of what's going on here. So we always have this balance when we're reading through portions of Scripture, that we can stop and do a lot of background work to really understand it fully, or we can just kind of do what we can do and move on. And really, that's up to you, how much you want to go back, understand more and more. But hopefully that's a growing hunger for you as you want to understand more and more of the story. One of the things we'll see as we walk through Matthew is that it's very focused on the fulfillment of God's promises to his people throughout the Old Testament. Israel, or the Jewish people, as we often refer to them. It's a very Jewish-focused gospel. But you also see along the way that there's others included in this story, and certainly Jesus will be the coming king, not only for the Jewish people, but ultimately will be Lord of the whole world and invite all of us, right, to come in. Let's just look at a snapshot here, and we'll try to wrap up here within 10 minutes or so total. Boaz is the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Now, Ruth, if you're not familiar, has a whole book in the Old Testament that tells her story. Ruth is not part of this family biologically, but she becomes part of the story. And so if we're going to have an application for us, I guess here on the front end, is that we are all, regardless of our background, where we come from, our religious upbringing, our family, etc., we're invited to become part of the story. And that happens in a pretty cool and crazy way if you go back and read the story of Ruth. But God is including us, inviting us to be a part of the story in all these kind of ways as well. And so that's a great opportunity, invitation that we have. And so hopefully as we walk through this over these next 90 days, we'll understand both more of the story and more of the invitation that God gives to you and I to become a part of the story that he's continuing to tell. So it's not just intellectual, it's understanding, but it's also living into, right, that reality that we are being invited into. And so Ruth, this unlikely person, becomes in the family line that King David is born out of. And then we see also that there's some messiness even in Jesus's family tree, and that David is the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. So that might kind of tip you off and say, huh, like what's going on there? Like, what do you mean he used to be Uriah's wife? What happened there? And so we see that there's, the more you understand the story, the more you understand the story then, the more you understand the story now. And this was probably the greatest failing in David's life, was this story. And again, you can read about it if you jump into these books in the Old Testament, like 1st and 2nd Samuel, will give you the background you need to understand what's going on there. Now, you don't need that to understand what's going on with Jesus, but the more you understand the Old Testament, the more you understand the New Testament. But in any case, the invitation will be there for us as well to kind of jump into that. So just a couple of things to point out there along the way. And of course, all this is funneling down to Jesus. And this is the end of that genealogy in verse 16. And Jacob is the father of Joseph, the husband of, so this line is Joseph's line, the husband of Mary, and Mary is the mother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah. The very next section after this starts the story that we typically read around Christmas time. And in Matthew, particularly focused on Joseph. And this is important because Joseph, in this next section, accepts Jesus as his son. And so we'll move forward in the story tomorrow in chapter 2. But I hope you'll join me in this reading, and have a great day. Happy New Year.